Well, thank you all for braving the rain. It's been raining all day. The pond at the end of our road is flooded. Um, we'll, we'll,
You got a lake in our front yard.
yep,
We can't drive any boats or anything. It's a lot of water.
I think a lot of people do. A lot of people do. So welcome. I'm glad you guys are here. This is a fun topic. It was a fun one for me to work up. I've done something new with my PowerPoint slides for this particular topic. I've embedded a lot of music videos. So we've been testing it and running it, and we're pretty confident that this is going to work, but I am going to try and play you quite a bit of music tonight. Excuse me. So welcome once again. Our topic for February is Johann Sebastian Bach, 1685 to 1750. So he is about 140 years after the death of Luther. He is born. He's 2 centuries down. His most productive years are 1720 to his death in 1750. He's about 30 years. The last 30 years of his life, he is the musical director at 2 churches in Leipzig. They're the 2 largest churches, and he writes music for both. He rehearses choirs and soloists for both, and part of his contract with the city, which controls the churches, is that he is obligated to compose a certain number of new pieces of music every year. So we have an incredible output from him, and I'll talk more about that as we go on. But just a reminder, here are the things I want to try and cover. A little bit about his background, who he was. I won't give you detail. There are some biographies over here. Obviously, I can't begin to touch in 1 hour what those biographies go into, but we'll talk a little bit about what influenced his music, why he is so admired and so influential. We'll touch on the question of, was he really a Christian, because that's been disputed. And what if you don't like classical music? And what influence does he still have? So again, the background on the Schaeffer Study Center. It was founded in 2004. Our mission statement is to promote a biblical worldview through the study of history, literature, and art. This falls under the art category, but also some history. It is named for the influential theologian Francis Schaeffer. In addition to these lectures, we also offer a high school program which is built around an integrated chronological study of Western civilization. And I am Rob Shearer, together with my wife. We are the directors of the Francis Schaeffer Study Center. She teaches literature, I teach history. We've been married for 47 years. Our 48th anniversary is coming up this year in August. We have 12 children, 21 grandchildren, and I haven't quite decided what I want to be yet when I grow up. I've been a little bit of everything. My undergraduate degree is from Davidson. I have a master's from Stanford. I studied history, and my field of specialty was early modern, so with a minor in medieval, so everything from medieval down to the French Revolution. After the French Revolution, I have a hard time generating a lot of enthusiasm, but I'm going to overcome that for next month. We'll talk about that at the end. I'm also the publisher at Greenleaf Press, and with my wife, co-director of the Schaeffer Study Center. I love traveling with students. I love taking them to places where we can talk about history. So this is me with a group of students in Rome in the Stanza Raffaello, which is part of the papal apartments. The Pope was able to pay Raphael to decorate his library. That's what this room was, with this very famous fresco that you've probably seen in an art history book somewhere, the School of Athens, with all the ancient Greek philosophers depicted on the wall there. And I'm trying to point out details to my students there. So to start us off, help me out. What's one thing you already know about Bach? He wrote music.
He signed Sola Deo Gloria.
He signed many of his pieces Sola Deo Gloria. Yeah, to the glory of God only. Yeah. All right, well, let me open us up with one of his very famous pieces. This is the Toccata and Fugue in D minor. This is a performance from a couple of years ago in the Berliner Dom, which is the main church, the cathedral in Berlin, and it's performed by a single keyboard player, Xaver Varnus. And I'll just play you the first 2.5 minutes of this, but yeah, we'll go ahead and start that rolling. And you'll see him, he's playing on a massive organ with 4 keyboards and bass pedals. And he's very often playing on 2 different registers. Sorry, my video here is behind that video there. Oh, is that that gets us okay? That got it. So, one of the amazing things about this, of course, is that Varnus here, Mr. Varnus, Xaver, is playing that from memory.
Yeah,
He doesn't have a score.
immediately.
Yeah, and he's at various times got 3 different melodic lines going, one with each hand and one with the foot pedals, and then sometimes 4. So he has to, with one of the hands, play 2 different melodies, themes, that are all harmonized together. It's just astonishing. So for those of us who don't read music, moi, I discovered these videos that actually visualize. So I'm going to pick up the same piece, the Toccata and Fugue, but this is a visualization of this. We'll go ahead and start this. So for me at least, that helps visualize what's going on because I don't read music. Here are some other snapshots. These are 4 snapshots at different points in that same piece. 4 snapshots of the notes that are being played at 4 different parts of the Toccata and Fugue. And this is the style music that Bach is famous for. The counterpoint, the rapid keyboard displays, the harmonies, the shifts, the fugue and the rounds, the repeated themes that overlap and merge and harmonize and diverge and then come back together. He's just the master of that. It's a classical style that is still extremely influential, and Bach is acknowledged to be sort of the master of this style. Now, I have a video, a short video, it's about 4 minutes, by a YouTube musician, Rick Beato, who comments on all sorts of different genres of music, mostly pop music in the 20th century, but he's classically trained. And so he's got a short little piece here that goes over sort of Bach's greatest hits. So I want to play that for you now.
I want to talk about some of the monumental works of Bach's lifetime. Many of you might be familiar with the air on the G string. Or Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring. I'm talking about the monumental, the landmark works that he wrote. There's about 8 of them or so that if you really want to know about Bach, you should really know these pieces or be familiar with them. There are the 2 books of the Well-Tempered Clavier. The first was written in 1722. When he was 37 years old. There are 24 preludes and fugues in that, as are the second book, which was written in 1742, 20 years apart.
Here's the 2 different lines.
Also has 24 preludes and fugues. These are just the most brilliant works of counterpoint and harmony and melody, really, in the history of music. These are the things that Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven and Schoenberg and everyone studied. We're going to talk about some of them in just a moment. Then I think you'd have to say the Brandenburg Concertos. Goldberg Variations. The orchestral suites, the Mass in B minor. The St. Johannes Passion, the St. Mathew Passion, the 6 cello suites. And lastly is the Art of Fugue, BWV 1080. This was written in the last decade of Bach's life. It is a series of 14 fugues and 4 canons based on a single subject. It was the culmination of his experimentation with monothematic contrapuntal writing. Ones to be familiar with if you want to know and understand the greatness of Bach, why people still talk about him 300 years after his death.
Okay, so there's Bach's greatest hits, an introduction to his style. And he mentions two of some very, very large orchestral pieces. They really are, the only way to describe them is as religious operas. The St. Mathew Passion, the St. John Passion, and the Mass in B minor, written for a Catholic church that he was friends with the musical director at. They run anywhere from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours long, and they're operatic. I'll talk a lot more about them as we get on here. So let me give you a basic sketch of the chronology of him. He was born in 1685, and the family that he comes from are all musicians, and they've been court musicians for generations, for a century. They had been court musicians to the Dukes of Saxony and to many of the other nobility throughout Germany. And Eisenach is, interestingly, the city where Luther spent time as well. When he was 10 years old, both his parents died. And he's taken in by his older brother, who was 14 years older than he was. So his older brother then raised him and taught him music. And his older brother was a court musician and very accomplished on multiple instruments, keyboard as well as stringed instruments, violin, cello. He won a choir scholarship for his singing ability at 14 to a school. At age 21, he got his first paying gig at a church in Mühlhausen, which is a smaller town in Saxony, not far from Eisenach. It's a good place for a young man to start out at 21. He married Maria Barbara Bach. I guess she would be Maria Barbara Bach. She was his second cousin. She was from the same family. 13 years later, she died, leaving behind 7 children. And 13 years, 7 children. He wrote some really amazing pieces of music, requiems, and you can hear the sorrow in his compositions from that time. He's 35 years old now, and a widower with 7 children. So a year later, he marries Anna Magdalena, and they have a further 13 children.
Equals 20.
Yeah. So he had 20 children total. Yep. And Anna Magdalena was also a musician. He composed pieces for her. She was a brilliant soprano. So he wrote pieces for her to sing. 1723, he gets the really, really prestigious position of music director at the St. Thomas Church in Leipzig. And the I'm giving it the German pronunciation. The St. Thomas Church in Leipzig is the largest church. That position is controlled by the city council. It carries with it all kinds of responsibilities for supervising the music at all the churches in town. There are 2 large ones, St. Thomas and St. Nicholas. And so he kind of alternates Sunday rehearsals and Sunday performances and directing. And for the rest of his life, he holds this position. So until 1750, for the next 27 years, he is in Leipzig, the music director, and constantly fighting with the elders at the church and the members of the city council because they don't pay him enough and they don't appreciate his music, and the children in the children's choir, the boys' choir that he's directing, are misbehaving and nobody will discipline them. And we have all kinds of letters back and forth. It's really, really amazing. So 4 years after he arrived in Leipzig, he premiered what is arguably the greatest composition of his entire musical career. We've talked about the preludes and the cantatas and the fugues and the arias. This is the 2.5-hour religious opera. And it premiered April 11th, 1727 at a Good Friday service. I'll talk some more about the details of what that looked like. It is astonishing. He dies in 1750. He is buried in the church, in the floor of the church up front near the altarpiece. You can see there's a metal bronze plate in the floor. And if you get interested in his music, you can buy the new complete edition of all of Bach's works It's on 222 CDs, plus a DVD. It's 280 hours of music, and it's a bargain at $549.98. The complete catalog of Bach's work, what we have scores for, what we have written musical notation for, 1,128 pieces of music. And so the Bach Werkeverzeichnis is the index of Bach's work. It's the official catalog in Leipzig, Germany. That's what they have cataloged. So each of them has a number, and you'll see BMV and then a title somewhere. That's how you can distinguish them, because there's lots and lots of fugues, lots and lots of cantatas, and to keep them all straight, they've numbered them. There's a couple of musicologists, though, who say, yeah, but that's only a portion of what he wrote. There's a lot of what he wrote that probably was lost. We don't have the musical transcriptions. There's at least one of those massive operas that we know about because there are written accounts describing its production and performance in the church, and nobody's got the music. He did a St. Mark Passion, did a St. John, St. Matthew, St. Mark. We don't have the St. Mark. We know he did it. We know there was a performance of it. The music has been lost. He wrote 200 cantatas that we still have. They're about 20 minutes long each. Cantata is typically done for a chamber orchestra, sometimes a chamber orchestra and 4 voices. St. John Passion in 1724, St. Matthew Passion 1727, St. Mark Passion 1731. It was thought to be lost. We've actually recovered it, we think. Since 1802, there are 700 biographies of him. I have 2 over here of more recent vintage. But yeah, he is just very, very well researched. There's a lot of historical documents, not quite as much as Luther, but an astonishing amount that we know, the details of his life. There's a YouTube channel for the Netherlands Bach Society that has 925 videos. They perform his pieces and do record. They're classical musicians in the Netherlands. There's a Sebastian Bach channel, has a further 241 videos. Here are these books over here from 2000, 2014, 2020. And then a wonderful little book there on the left called An Evening at the Palace of Reason, when Bach met Frederick the Great. He went to Berlin. His son was actually the court musician in Berlin, in Brandenburg, and Frederick the Great was a musician and challenged him to improvise a fugue on a theme. So Frederick played a musical theme of about 16 notes, and then said, can you improvise a fugue on that in 3 voices? And Bach thought for a minute or 2, and he sat down at the keyboard, and he played for about 10 minutes.
And that was his son.
Well, his son was the court musician for Frederick the Great. That's why, and Frederick the Great was really, really fascinated with old Bach, as he called him, because he had young Bach as his musician. And he says, get your dad to come visit. I want to hear him play. So, now the versatility of what Bach wrote and his appeal beyond just classical music, I think, can be demonstrated if he were writing for a rock band. So I'm going to play another section of that same Toccata and Fugue that we saw Varnus playing at the beginning and that we saw the visualization on. This is the same piece of music, and these musicians are playing it note for note. They're doubling and tripling some stuff, but it's about 3 guys on bass and 12 guys on electric guitar. So roll this one. So that's about 15 guys, Spanish guitar players. It's a band called Sinfonity. And they cover classical music, but with electric guitar. And that's not an improvisation on their part. That's actually the way Bach wrote the piece. I think Bach would love it. So I mentioned he's appointed cantor of the Thomasschule, so that it was actually a school attached to the church where the boys got free tuition and were taught classes. In exchange for their getting free tuition, they then rehearsed every afternoon and performed for Sunday worship services. And Bach wrote music, original pieces for them. There we go, they're the Passions. In 1729, he got a side gig. He took over direction of Leipzig Collegium Musicum, which had been founded by Telemann in 1702. And that's a name that'll mean something to people who like classical music, but the rest of us probably don't recognize him. That was a student musical society. It was largely students from the University of Leipzig, and they performed secular music on Friday nights at Zimmermann's Coffee House. And Bach wrote pieces for them and played with them and fought with the town council and the church elders about it. So, but he did that as well. Mass in B minor, well-tempered clavier, Goldberg. Rick Beato talked about all of these. In 1747, he performed in Potsdam for Frederick the Great. And at the end of his life, he was working on The Art of the Fugue, which is not a book about how a fugue should be done. It is about 15 or 16 pieces, all on a single theme. It's a book of musical notes. And it's the last thing he worked on before he died. Now, there's been some question over the years, maybe it's the aftermath of his conflict with the city council and the church elders and his dabbling with the students at the university, about was he just a professional musician, or do all of his religious pieces of music actually have behind them any of his personal convictions? Play you another little clip here. This is a wonderful discovery. Go ahead and roll this one, Gary.
When Johann Sebastian Bach died, a list was made of his holdings in his library, and this was listed as the first one on the list of 81 volumes. It was kept by Anna Magdalena along with the 8-volume set of Luther's works. When she died, it was still in her possession. We lose track of it until 1830, and then it shows up in Philadelphia at a used bookstore. The Reichel family, living in Philadelphia, bought it, and it became their, quote, family heirloom Bible. They had no idea what they had. So when they moved to Michigan, they took it along, and it passed from one generation to another. And in 1930s, a cousin who was a pastor came to stay at their house. And in the evening, they were sitting there in the living room, and the third volume of this 3-volume set was sitting on the coffee table. He reached over and opened up the front cover, and there in the lower right corner of the title page, it says J.S. Bach, 1733. And of course, he was astounded at what this is. Could this really be real? They made a tracing of the signature and sent it to Hans Preuss, who was the leading Bach scholar at the time. And he confirmed it, yes, that was for sure his signature, and wanted to know where are the other 2 volumes. They did a search and they found them in the attic. They tried to convince him to send the books to Germany where the Bach scholars were. And of course, who was coming to power in Germany at that time in the 1930s but Adolf Hitler. And of course, this staunch Missouri Synod Lutheran farmer said, no way am I going to send it to the Nazis. So he gave it to Concordia Seminary, and they promptly put him in their Weber collection behind sealed doors and forgot that they had it.
From 1930 until just after 2000, they were in Concordia Seminary, and nobody knew what they had.
We've always known about his faith. However, it's never been proven that he actually believed, had a faith, and used that in his music. He was hired by a church, and he wrote church music. What else was he going to write? And even the famous musicologist Friedrich Blume said, we have absolutely no proof that he was actually a staunch Lutheran or believed what he was doing. Not until the Bible was discovered in the farmhouse did we know. Because here we have things written in his own personal Bible, not for anyone else. He says in one spot, a marvelous proof that in devotional music, God is always present with his grace. And it's a different kind of Bible. It's a commentary Bible, so there's a verse followed by a few comments on it, followed by a verse, followed by comments, etc., throughout the entire Scripture. And he is commenting on both biblical text and the commentary associated with it for his own edification. Therefore, absolutely proving without a doubt that he was a believer, and he used that in his art.
So you can go visit. If you're in St. Louis, I would encourage you to go out to Concordia Seminary because they have his Bible out now in the library on display under lock and key, but they do have it on display. All right, I want to say a thing or two. I want to focus the time we have remaining about that single major monumental piece, the St. Mathew Passion, the 2.5-hour religious opera. This is the era, 1700s, when opera is finding its great masters in the Italian and French world of composition. And people actually said to Bach a time or two, why don't you write an opera? And he always sort of dismissed it, but then he produced this. And it is unbelievable in terms of its complexity and its beauty. I'll just read, this is Gaines's summary of it from the book Evening in the Palace of Reason. It deploys every style and form, 2 choirs, 2 orchestras. Bach created a masterpiece, a work far more elaborate and intricately plotted than the most ambitious opera of its time, embracing music for stage, court, and church. Polyphonic counterpoint, motets, chorales, choirs, and arias for solo and duet, arias with chorus, the whole work ranging through all 12 chromatic keys, and even beyond that to the 6-flat key of E-flat minor. It was an it was an insanely ambitious mix of dances and dirges, passages of gallant song and the Renaissance madrigals, free verse arias, gospel recitatives, and the bold concision of Italian melody and the ravishing filigree work of France, all brought into perfect coherence in a profound and staggering, beautiful work of art. It is astonishing. And what it does is it takes 2 chapters from the book of Matthew. It's the biblical account of Jesus' Last Supper, his arrest, his trial, his execution, and his burial. And it was written to be performed on Good Friday. It's not an Easter performance. It's not an Easter cantata. It is a Good Friday service. It begins with the Last Supper. It ends with Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea placing Jesus' body in the tomb. And on Bach's instruction, there is no applause at the end. 2.5 hours, there's an intermission, but there's no applause at the end. Actually, the intermission, believe it or not, at the performances in Leipzig, we know of 2 occasions on which it was staged. The pastor preached a sermon during the intermission, and then they resumed the 2.5-hour performance. But at the end, nobody applauds. The congregation stands and exits the church silently because they're coming back on Sunday for the celebration. This is a meditation on the Good Friday. There are separate readers for each part, so he writes solo musical recitatives for Jesus and the disciples and Pontius Pilate and the high priest and Judas. They're all different voices. Pilate's wife is a soprano solo. There are hymns to reflect on each event in the story that he weaves in. Arias by solo singers. He had a friend who was a poet who wrote some poetic meditations on each particular event of Jesus for this last week. And it runs through this variety of styles and the biblical text to a solo contemplating on that, to the integration of a hymn, back to the narrator doing the biblical text. That is Bach's own handwritten score. And the score is itself a masterpiece. It is, Christoph Wolff, that's the author of the biography there, it says it is, by its external features alone, it is a precious jewel. It's unlike any other Bach autograph. So you may not be able to read all of this. I'll just briefly go over it. This is an outline. So the numbering of the pieces is in that left-hand column there. So there are 68 total pieces there. And then the 16 scenes of this opera that's performed over 2.5 hours. But wait. Here's part one, and I know you can't read that. But they outline which of the soloists are singing, the first choir, the first orchestra, the musical parts, the second choir, the second orchestra, and the key over there in the far right-hand column. So I know you probably can't read those. I'll have to come around myself, actually, to see them. But C, B, C, A over D, F sharp, B, G, F, A over B, G, E, E flat, F over C, C, D over B flat, G, B, C over B, B over C, and E. Part one. The musicians at this point are going crazy. Takes months to rehearse this. Here's part two. Same level of complexity. 2 choirs, 2 orchestras, yeah, and soloists. There's the rest of part two. And you see all the way on the bottom right-hand column. This is piece number 68. On page 263 in the score. And here are the keys. And he has hymns. There's one hymn that really is kind of the theme hymn for the whole performance that ties it together. And I can show you. They're called chorales. So these are the various hymns that he has incorporated into this performance where the choirs sing and the congregation actually would sing along because they would be familiar hymns. One hymn he actually puts in 8 times. Sorry, not 8, 6. It's 6 times. O Sacred Head Once Wounded, which is an old melody and old lyrics. He puts it in and it's 1 verse at a time. But here's the thing. It's in 6 different keys. Just so everybody stays awake paying attention. And so here's an opening aria. I'm not going to play this for you because we just, for time's sake. But this is an English translation, obviously. The text of this is always performed in Germany. And I have a recording of a performance in the church in Leipzig, in the St. Thomas Church, where the 13th direct successor of Bach is the musical master and conductor. So this is piece 1, Come Ye Daughters, Share My Mourning, See Him the Bridegroom. When Jesus had finished speaking, he said to his disciples, you know that in 2 days it will be the Passover, the Son of Man shall be handed over to be crucified. So the part of Matthew is the narrator, that's done by a tenor. The part of Jesus is a separate soloist, that would be a bass voice. And then the choirs come in, Beloved Jesus, what wrong have you done that they have pronounced so harsh a sentence upon you? Of what are you guilty? Into what sinful ways have you fallen? So you get the text from Matthew and then a reflection on it. I just want to play you now that piece. So yeah, go ahead and hit it.
Da Jesus diese Rede vollendet hatte, sprach zu seinen Jüngern.
Ihr wisset, dass nach 2 Tagen Ostern wird, und des Menschen Sohn wird überantwortet werden, dass gekreuziget werde.
same sort of pattern. Scriptural piece set as a recitative, and then a hymn or an aria or a bit of poetry leading meditation on that. And I want to give you now, this is the familiar hymn. This is a hymn that we may know, many of us. People, I guess I'm betraying my age. I grew up when we still sang hymns out of a hymn book. And this is one of my favorites. O Sacred Head Once Wounded. So it's piece 21 and piece 23 are two of the verses of that hymn. And I want to play you then the first verse that's excerpted from that hymn, Erkenne mich mein Hüter, acknowledge me my keeper. Mein Hirte nimm mich an, my shepherd accept me, grant me shelter. So we'll play that and you'll hear it's set for the congregation to join in. Okay, so now we'll go to the second introduction. There's a little piece in between, a little bit of recitative, the scripture set to music that you'll hear first, and I don't have those lyrics up, unfortunately, but it's fairly short. And then we come in with another verse from that same hymn. So, Carrie?
Petrus aber antwortete und sprach zu ihm: Wenn sie auch alle sich an dir ärgerten, so will ich doch mich nimmer mehr ärgern. Jesus sprach zu ihm:
Wahrlich, ich sage dir, in dieser Nacht, ehe der Hahn kräht, wirst du mich dreimal verleugnen.
Petrus sprach zu ihm: Und wenn ich mit dir sterben müsste, so will ich dich nicht verleugnen. Desgleichen sagten auch alle Jünger.
You got a good view of what the interior of that church looks like there. Let's say what I want to do for you now, this is part 54, so this is after the intermission. This is Jesus on trial before Pilate. And Pilate's wife, this is in the book of Matthew, these are actually the verses from Matthew's gospel. Pilate's wife comes and says, "Do not have anything to do with that innocent man. I have suffered much as a result of a dream I had about him today." But the chief priests and elders persuaded the people to ask for Barabbas. And I just want to let you hear how Bach translates that into music. He turns this scene into an opera. And go.
Da auf dem Richtstuhl saß, schickte sein Weib zu ihm und ließ ihm sagen: Habe du nicht so schaffen mit Nasen Gerechte? Ich habe heute viel mitten im Traum von seinetwegen. Aber die hohen Priester und die Ältesten überredeten das Volk, dass sie Barabbas bitten sollten und Jesu umbrächten. Da antworteten der Landpfleger und sprach zu ihnen:
Welchen wollt ihr unter diesen Zeilen, den ich euch soll losgeben?
Sie sprachen:
Pretty effective? It's opera with parts. Here's, the chorale. O Sacred Head. There's an English translation that's more German there on the right. I don't have time to play all of this because we're running out of time, and I want to get you to the finale. I mean, the reason you go watch an opera is for the finale, right? The big conclusion to the whole drama. This is the crucifixion, and it's quite dramatic in Bach's setting of it, obviously. He puts a verse of the hymn in again at 72. Be near me, Lord, when dying. And then here's the very last piece number 78. Wir setzten uns mit Tränen nieder. Setzen. We sit ourselves down with tears. It's present tense, not past. I need to edit that. So again, this is just these last 9 lines before the conclusion of the 2.5 hour long telling of the story. So, yeah. Video's still rolling. And you can hear people getting up and leaving. They start rehearsing about 6 months before the performance. It's just amazing. Yeah. Bach is just incredible. On my bucket list is I want to go see a performance in the St. Thomas Church. But they only do it about once every 5 years. But they do it on Good Friday. So we will continue next month on in March. I've got it here, March 11th. So 30 days from now, well, 28 days from now, 4 weeks. William Bradford and John Winthrop, the Pilgrims and the Puritans. Bradford is an orphan. He grows up in a small village in the north of England, and he winds up being the governor of the Pilgrim plantation. When they come across the ocean. Winthrop was a university-educated lawyer. And 10 years after Bradford came over on one ship, Winthrop led a fleet of 11 ships with 700 colonists, the Great Puritan Migration. And over the following 10 years, another 10,000. So we'll talk about all of that when we come back together next week. Yeah, the experience of the Pilgrims, and we get them confused. And it's no wonder the history books don't devote very much time. You know, it's like we know we celebrate a big feast because the Pilgrims and the Indians came together for a giant meal, but we don't really get much more than that. So I want to talk a great deal more about who these guys were, focusing on why they left England. Because the decision to leave England was just unbelievably important and fraught with incredible danger. Half the Pilgrims died the first winter. Almost half of the 700 who came 10 years later in the Puritan fleet also died in the first 12 months. So, thanks for coming. I look forward to seeing you again next month. And we'll wrap it up.